Hi, welcome back. Hi, I'm going to talk about some of the issues that Mike has referenced in terms of our experience of time and space. Time and space is what we traditionally thought the present was made up of when we walk through towns, when we walk through spaces. Having said that, the language and the vocabulary that we talk about and we use to describe that experience is clearly under stress because the nature of the internet and the speed of light that we travel at when we move from one cyberspace to another cyberspace changes some of those relationships. Tools for a post-Cartesian city talks about that very relationship, and if I can get a close-up, very simply by taking the frameworks of time, which is signified using a clock, and space using a 1 meter ruler, by swapping over the dials or the increments that traditionally appear on those systems, we can look at the clock, which was traditionally something that would have 12 moments of increments of hours and minutes, actually has been replaced with 100 centimeters taken from a Stanley meter ruler. And conversely, on the meter ruler, which traditionally would have 100 centimeters, it actually has 12 increments suggesting hours and minutes. Now, these are things that we can talk about as being a swap, somehow as though the vocabularies, the language of those spaces, time and spaces, can be moved around and become fluid again, when in a time, actually, they were quite fixed. Mike, if I can hand you those. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about these things. Now, when we talk about the present, I'm going to walk over here, sorry. The present as we know it is obviously time and space together and a synchronous experience of those composites. In Hagerstrand's model, which is taken from the Lund University in Sweden, we talk about that as though we can map it in time travelling up throughout the day across a space that was perhaps spread across a town. And we can see here in this diagram how a father and a mother move throughout the day, interacting with each other across those connected times and spaces. Now, in new media, we're going to begin to see those under stress. Spatial cognitive scientists talk about this, and what's interesting that we begin to realise that some of the systems of new media, some of the systems of old media, some of the systems traditionally of storytelling also embed in us a linearity and a hierarchical way of dealing with time and space. And these two are going to become under stress. Traditionally, in this model that Tversky and Coop talked about, we can talk about some of the hierarchical stresses. My compatriot has actually skipped a screen there, but I will move on. In Northern Ireland, we have an example of this as the hierarchy of nations, which makes up the UK, causes a problem when we begin to start sending postcards from one part of the UK to another. For instance, in the northern part of Southern Ireland, if I send a postcard, because it has to travel through a hierarchy of the UK to get up to Northern Ireland, the actual country, it actually travels through the UK and actually over to England, or certainly to Belfast, in order to get back to the northern part of Ireland. So when we begin to break down and talk about space, it is broken down in hierarchies and linearities. When we tell stories about the spaces we live in, we tell a story and you and I digest it just as we do through television. Now, when we talk about new media, we've got a different landscape. Having said that, we're using the same vocabulary. We're using Netscape Navigator, we're using websites, we're using cyberspaces, and many of the vocabularies that we talk about these kind of things, which are actually spaces. They're spaces of representation, which we can talk about as space out there and Earth down here, and we talk about home pages and home sites, so on and so forth. When we look at the web, obviously we'd like to think we're experiencing in a very dynamic manner. Often we're experiencing in quite a linear manner, which refers to paper-based publishing, the idea of the book. And again, we talk about those same hierarchies and linear systems, which are bogging down much of this new media from actually taking off and exploring new systems. Having said that, although it does present itself in this linear manner, our experience of it, we know, as we experience the Euronet website, is much more dynamic. We can move through hyperlinks, wormholes, as we could talk about, as though we're dynamically shifting our relationship with that cyberspace. And some of the problems that we talked about when we talk about hierarchies begin to break down or certainly become stressed out. Moving on to another map then, because maps are very much under stress, and we're going to see new maps emerging as people like ourselves are going to start generating new ways to talk about these other spaces. We can reference the JANET system, again, that which is delivering the joint academic networks and the sort of stuff that we're experiencing, and hopefully you may be seeing across the web now. We can talk about a map here which maps Edinburgh up there and does in fact put Exeter down here, but there's no sense of distance because the speed of light is obviously the medium now, and we're travelling to all of those places extremely fast. So our sense of mapping is beginning to be dismantled, certainly from a traditional manner. Okay, I'm going to move to an experiment now that perhaps explores some of these problems and suggests some alternative ways that we might have to start thinking about some of these models. I'm going to use the weather as the metaphor for this. So as I move into weather mode, using a traditional map, we can begin to see throughout the day today, there's a very strong element of sunlight, and most of England is getting a great deal of sun throughout the eastern side of the country. However, through the start of the day, we're beginning to see cloud move into the southwest and indeed into Western Ireland. Throughout the day, however, this cloud will move over toward the east and increasingly shed rain across into Wales and increasingly across into the southwest. However, although the cloud will try and resist, toward the end of the day, we'll see this at the end of the day become a full rain bank, and in fact into the early hours of the morning. Now, that was a traditional model. What I'm going to try and present now is an alternative model that again reflects perhaps some of the stresses and strains that new media is put on to those similar or traditional vocabularies. Okay, we can see now at 12 o'clock a wonderful sunlight is raining down on the southwest and indeed across most of northern Europe. However, moving toward 2 o'clock, although the sun is going to last for a couple of hours, as we move toward 4 o'clock, the clouds are going to start moving in, and we're going to start to see that wonder part of the day move away. The clouds move to darker clouds, and certainly by 5 o'clock, maybe even 7 o'clock, we can begin to expect some rain. And this will indeed follow through to 10 o'clock and indeed to the early hours of the morning. Thank you for that small weather interlude. Now we're going to move over to Mike, and we're going to begin to talk about some of the systems and the technology that is going to do some of this distorting as we begin to change some of those vocabularies. Okay, Mike.